So it's been almost a year since I made the bold decision to sell my Red Komodo X and go to the Blackmagic Pyxis. It's a joke I'm going to keep beating like a dead horse, except for the fact that now it's been a year, I still want to say that I don't have any regrets. But in today's video, I want to talk about using the Blackmagic Pyxis on a feature film set, because obviously a cinema camera is going to be used for filmmaking, so it makes the most amount of sense to use it in that application. Except there's a little bit of a twist, because I wasn't the DP on this project, I wasn't even the camera operator. Well, I was the first AC on a feature film set in Italy. We'll get there. Now, for what it's worth, I am going to say there are a couple of sponsors in this video. There's Blackmagic, because, well, they sponsored the resource that we needed to make this film. Condor Blue has also supplied us with a lot of the rigging, and I got to use my brand new capture cups in this video. We needed some communications as well, so we use the Axoon headsets in order to communicate between crew members and crew. And also, we use Lucid Link because, well, I'm an idiot, and I didn't get any of the BTS footage before making this video, so I literally have to do that later. But we'll be using Lucid Link in order to do that. There, how's that for disclosure? Now, on this particular shoot, I was a first AC, or more particularly, I was a second unit first AC. Now, what exactly is being a first AC? Now, I am gonna say this with a little bit of a caution. I don't first AC very often. This is maybe the 4th or 5th time that I have in my entire career. So in terms of me trying to speak like an expert on being a first AC, we're gonna throw that out of the window for a second, because we were working with a smaller, nimble team. Although I still understand my responsibilities, they just might be augmented depending on the shoot. Now, a lot of times people associate being a first AC with pulling focus, which is a skill set that you do actually need to have. But there's a bunch of other stuff that you have to keep in mind, because you're essentially going to be the quarterback of your camera department. You're going to be in charge of prepping and rigging your gear. Now, the irony of this one was I was actually ACing my own camera kit, so in terms of being familiar with using the Blackmagic Pyxis and that workflow, it actually came pretty easy. But organization is going to be the name of the game. We were using Blazer Remus lenses on both cameras, but we also had 6 in total because we had 3 on each one. That means you're gonna have to do things like organizing and labeling different things in your camera department, which also has to do a lot with camera prep, but you're also gonna be a little bit of a technician as well. Setting up things like wireless transmission in your headsets in order to communicate between crew and crew members is gonna be something that you're gonna get looped into at some point when you're working on set. You're also gonna be in charge of moving the camera around on sticks and taking a little bit of a break off of your camera operator. This might be delegated to different people on set, but for me, particularly on the shoot as a first AC for my unit, that was a responsibility that I had to take up. You're also going to be a little bit of camera support as well, and making sure that settings are going to be dialed in. Tamara, who was actually our camera operator, was her first time using the Blackmagic Pyxis. She was great at getting composition, but also some of the more technical things. As someone that's more familiar with it, that was something that I had to help out with as well. Essentially, what the first AC is going to be is that you're just going to be in charge of the camera and assisting with everything with it, from the technical side of things, rigging the camera up, making sure the department is prepped and organized in order to do things, especially lens changes, because we did quite a bit of those, and making sure that things are going to be in focus, which is actually sometimes feels like the least important or the least busy things in terms of the hierarchy of needs. But essentially, your role is, your responsibility is making sure that camera is operational, it's working, and it's organized, and also in focus. But there is one thing that I haven't really talked about a lot since it came out, but I use one of these guys. Now, one of my responsibilities as a second unit first AC, I'm just going to say first AC for the rest of this video, is the ability to pull focus. Now, I usually pull from the barrel, especially if I don't have a first AC. Maybe I don't have the budget for it and I put money elsewhere. But I also keep one of these guys, which is the DJI hand unit, which actually works really well with some of the focus motors that are on there. If you have watched a previous video that I put out, which actually was about a year ago, I talked about the new upgraded focus motors that you can use in some of the new generation DJI products. One thing that might be either underrated or you might not know about is the fact that you not only can connect that focus motor directly to the Pyxis and draw power from it, but you can wirelessly connect it to this hand unit and you can pull focus pretty easily. Now, this isn't the most high-tech focus pulling system in the world, but the thing that I like is that it does connect pretty seamlessly to my DJI focus motor. You can set your A and B points, and also the wheel itself is big enough for my oversized hands. Another skill set that you're going to have aside from being organized and also making sure you pull focus, is your ability to communicate. And that's where Axoon helped us out a lot with their new headset.
You're gonna get a really decent range up to 1,300 feet. It only takes about 2 hours to charge the battery, and you can get 10 hours of battery life charge. You're also gonna be able to connect 9 different headsets between the host and some of the guest headsets as well. So as long as I stay within 1,300 feet of the host headset, I'm gonna be able to get a decent range, decent quality sound, and this is one of the more important things, especially when you're working with a lot of people on set. A special shout out to Axoon for actually sponsoring this video. A lot of this film couldn't happen without them. So let's talk a little bit more about the Blackmagic Pyxis working on a feature film set, especially as someone as a first AC who actually has to work with the camera quite a bit. Okay, So it's super windy outside. I don't know if I want to pull focus outside while it's cold. So we're gonna try an experiment. I want to see how far of a distance I can get on the DJI motor to my hand unit. And if I get all the way in the car, I'm gonna be pulling focus there. So we're just gonna Is the lens still hang on a second. Oh, so is it going? Is it going? I'm pulling focus in this vehicle for the rest of the day. Okay, so the Focus Pro hand unit actually works on the monitor from this distance. So in order to avoid being out in the cold pulling focus all day, I'm gonna do it in the car.
Now, it's no surprise that the Blackmagic Pyxis is a filmmaker's tool because, well, no kidding, it's a cinema camera. But there's a couple things from the perspective of being more of a first AC than a camera operator or a DP that I didn't really know that I liked until you got into that position in the first place. Now, for one is going to be the screen, which I kind of already knew that was kind of the big thing about the Blackmagic Pyxis in terms of its body and design. But one thing that I like about that screen is when I need to communicate to my DP in terms of what they want in terms of settings, I don't have to fumble around through menus in order to do that. The Blackmagic Pyxis has an incredibly easy menu system, and I also feel like I'm a bit more out of the way when I'm using that monitor because it's not going to be used for viewing, so while my camera operator or anybody else is looking at the monitor on the camera itself or on a director's monitor off camera, I could use that screen in order to adjust the settings that we needed to do in order to get the shots that we wanted. And one thing I didn't know is that USB port at the front of the camera also delivers power, not only to the Blackmagic monitor, which you can finally get in stock now. I broke character, my bad. But you could run power into the USB-enabled DJI motor, so that way it makes it easier to pull focus and calibrate and do all the other fun stuff that you need to do because, yeah, one of your jobs, you gotta pull focus. Now, because also I'm pulling focus, I've set focus a lot of times, it also makes not having autofocus kind of inconsequential. Now, on more production workflows, if you're working in film, if you're working on commercial, generally speaking, you don't really see a lot of autofocus. Now, that's not to say that the autofocus is bad, it's not to say that the autofocus is the devil, Bobby Boucher. But generally speaking, different lenses are going to have different character to them, and oftentimes they're going to be manual, which you're going to need someone like a first AC in order to pull focus. I promise I'm going to try my best to say focus a little bit less. But speaking of lenses with a bit more character, we did use a full set of Blazar Remus lenses. This has nothing much to do with the Blackmagic Pyxis, but I've been using these Remus lenses for quite a long time, and I'm really happy that we're able to use them on this film, and it created some really good images at the same time. A random aside, but I do feel like it's really cool that a lot of these companies are making equipment more and more accessible and overall cheaper than what they used to be, especially on indie filmmaking sets like this one. We didn't have $1 million budget. In fact, I actually don't really know the budget for it. We only came in on crew for about 3 days while we were in Italy. But at the same time, being able to use a camera package that, if you tally everything up, everything's going to be $110,000 for the Blackmagic Pyxis, which, albeit, is still a lot of money. It's a lot less than what things used to be. Also, what's nice that other cameras don't have is SDI connection and as well as timecode. Now, timecode is kind of self-explanatory in 2025. Essentially, it runs a little time generator, so that way it could sync up with the audio because we had a sound recorder that was on set. But SDI is something that's a little bit different.
So the Blackmagic Pyxis doesn't have the ability to run an HDMI. It only has the option of SDI, which actually isn't a bad thing. Now, with an HDMI cable, generally what's going to happen if you run a long cable, you're going to have a bit of issues in terms of connectivity. The resolution might drop off. It's just not a secure type of connection. Now, with SDI, you're able to do something like this. Right now, we have a lot of interference going on with our wireless transmitter, and what we have to do is we actually have to hardwire from the camera directly to the monitor so I can pull focus and I can see a little bit better resolution than 360p with a gigantic amount of latency. So right now we are going to use this. So right now we are going to use this 10 foot. So right now we are going to use this 10 foot. So we are going to use this 10 foot. Oh, okay. So we are going to use this 25-foot SDI cable by Condor Blue. So that way I can get a little bit of distance from the camera and I can still pull focus, but at the same time, I don't have any loss in quality.
Now, in terms of the Blackmagic Pyxis and using it in a cinema workflow, the image quality is going to be one of the biggest questions. And I don't know if you've been on this channel for very long, the image quality looks great, and I like the Blackmagic Pyxis for being able to do that. Now, a lot of people will use things like the Ronin 4D or the Sony FX3 as kind of a reasoning as to why some of these smaller cameras can work in applications for things like Netflix or even in big movie theaters. And the Pyxis, in my opinion, having competitive, if not a little bit better image quality, I think this is more than enough for indie filmmakers, narrative filmmakers, commercial, as long as you get around some of the caveats, which we talked about in a previous video over here. And lastly, my favorite thing about the Blackmagic Pyxis is that its improvement while using the same sensor as the full frame 6K, but in a more box style environment. Having a design that's a little bit more boxy or rectangular or whatever that shape is of the Blackmagic, it's conducive for rigging out the camera, which we're going to touch on a little bit because we did use all of our rigging parts from Condor Blue. Surprise, the response of this video. Now I have talked about my Blackmagic Pyxis rig in an earlier video, and if you want to see the full breakdown, I'm not going to bore you, I'm going to put that video over here. There's a lot of video references in this one. But one thing that I do like is the different options that you can have from Condor Blue in order to rig up your Blackmagic Pyxis. If you're working on a smaller shoot where you might have to be a little bit more run and gun, or you're working in a full production, you have different options in terms of rigging up that Blackmagic Pyxis setup to fit your needs. Now, one thing that I was missing in that previous video talking about the Blackmagic Pyxis rig is their matte box. Now, the matte box, you could actually get multiple steps in there. It also has a lot of versatility to it. You could add on different steps on the backside if you want to put on more filters. We used a combination of hard stop NDs, but if you want to use things like polarization or you want to use a diffusion filter, you could add some extra steps. Now, not only can you get that on the back side of the matte box, and you can get your adapter rings, which we did use on the Blazar Remus lenses, but on the front side of things, you can still get a 4x5 filter on the front as well. There was a couple of times where we had a little bit of a mismatch in terms of the NDs and how many stops we actually needed to get a particular shot, and instead of scrambling around to find a higher ND, we could put a couple in the back, one at the front, and we can get the exposure that we need to because we were running two cameras. Essentially what I want to say here is Condor Blue makes a lot of the rigging a lot easier. It's made by creatives for creatives, which also, well, talk about a little bit later, but for the most part, special shout out to Condor Blue for actually supplying the rigging for these cameras.
So in the edit of this video, I might have been a little bit irresponsible and I forgot to take the time to get all the BTS from all the cameras while we were in Italy. Actually, as a matter of fact, it would have taken way too long to be able to do that because Mike Tobin decided to shoot on an Ursa 12K. Usually I would use other services in order to transfer footage back and forth, and sometimes it'd be a little bit clunky. Sometimes you have to have like 75 zip folders, which got really annoying. But today we're going to talk about Lucid Link. Now, Lucid Link has a bunch of different formats between using your browser or using an iOS app, but I prefer the app on my laptop. The reason why I like doing that is because it has individual file spaces. Everybody on this project was able to upload all their data from their particular cameras in order to have it in one centralized place. Now, that happens if you use things like Google Drive or something else, but one thing that I like about Lucid Link a lot is the seamless workflow directly into Finder. That way I could drag and drop folders just as if the Lucid Link link itself or the file space was an external drive. So I didn't have to download any of the files directly to my computer. I could use it as sort of a wireless SSD drive that goes onto the cloud. And if you are someone who's not necessarily working in the best internet connection possible, or maybe you don't have all the space in the world, you could actually cache those files, put them in a centralized place, and use low-res versions of those files in order to complete your edit and then just relink the originals later on. A special shout out to Lucid Link for sponsoring this video, but let's get back into me talking about being a first AC. Although I don't really first AC that often.
Now, I try my best not to be a whiny baby, but every single production you're going to have is going to have its own separate set of challenges. And this one, when I'm working on films with the creator crew, is something that's more of an internal challenge that I tend to have, and not necessarily anything wrong with the production itself. Now, you've probably watched this video long enough to say, hey, that's a lot of sponsors there, and I will agree with you. There's a lot of different brands that have gotten involved in order to help us make the films that we want to. Whether that be somebody that's part of the team that's writing a film, or another production that's a friend of the creator crew that we want to help support, which we actually did on this day. Now, this film isn't going to release until next year, but our DP Adam, actually, who's been our first AC on a lot of our creator films, and the directing team between Scott and Knox that were actually directing the film as well, being able to come in as crew under the banner of different brands, be able to use some of these tools helps actually bridge the gap between some of the budgetary things you might have a roadblock with. Now, where my challenge is, and what have been a challenge for a little bit, is while trying to make YouTube content while also being good on set as well. Coming in as a second unit first AC to a crew that I'm not widely familiar with, you want to make a good impression. You want to be useful on set. You want to make sure that you're doing your job. You want to make sure that you're nailing your focus in every shot. You want to make sure that you're organized. You're not interrupting the workflow of a crew that's already had multiple days of production and still at the same time make videos just like these. Now, for the most part, when I tried to ask and try to check in and make sure that everything was all right, everyone was pretty pleased in terms of the entire crew, not just myself, coming on set, being able to help out, and also helping out with some of the resources to make the film just a little bit better in terms of its production and make things smoother. But at the same time, one thing that I'm always kind of plagued with is whether or not I'm doing a good job in either direction. Either I'm making a bad YouTube video and I'm dialed in on set, or I'm not that dialed in on set because I'm trying to make content. But in this situation, this is kind of something that's in my own head because every time I try to ask and check in and every time I try to receive feedback to get better, well, it seems to be going pretty okay and everybody's pretty happy with how things are moving. Another challenge as a second unit AC coming in a little bit later is you kind of feel like you're a new kid in school that someone's brother brought you into, but you don't really know anybody that well, so you're not really sure how the lay of the land is and how the rules of engagement are. Sometimes when you're coming on production, you're not getting there on day one. You might be getting there halfway through or the tail end. Maybe you're just getting pickup shots with the secondary unit, and that's something where you have to consider that there already is kind of a workflow that the crew already has. But that's something I kept in mind, and I tried not to let bug me too much. But at the end of the day, in the back of your head, you still kind of feel like you're the new kid in school, and it's a little bit weird. Overcoming either one of these issues is doing the best that you can, being as available and helpful as you can, maintaining your roles and responsibilities in terms of what your role is, and just trying to be a good vibe on set, really. Overall, I think the Blackmagic Pyxis is more than enough for narrative sets, commercial, and overall just as a good cinema camera tool. The fact that some of these companies are making these cameras a lot more cheaper and accessible, the fact that you can rig it out with any sort of accessory, Condor Blue notwithstanding, especially at a more affordable price, is something where you're going to start to see a lot of these cameras on a lot more professional and narrative and other filmmaking situations. For example, I mean, we all talked about the creator using the Sony FX3, but Adolescence just came out on Netflix, which also used the Ronin 4D as well. There's also a bunch of different examples where using some of these more, I guess, content creator cameras or like just not RE cameras, I don't know what you want to call them, are being used in more professional environments. And I think the Blackmagic Pyxis, for what it is, what it can do, I think it's more than enough for a lot of people. Now, the last thing I want to leave this video with is talking about the position itself as a first AC. Look, this isn't the most flashy video in the world. I wasn't the person in the spotlight. I wasn't the DP for this thing. But one thing I think you're going to have to realize is you don't have to be the center of the universe all the time. Look, it's really fun to be a DP. It's really fun to portray yourself as an expert on set. But sometimes you got to take a support role, take an assist role in order to make the production a lot better. Something that I like about these more indie sets or working with crews with your friends is that things are going to be removed in terms of your ego. The first time we worked with a creator crew on a film set, I was a key grip, which isn't the most flashy job in the world. The next one I was a camera operator, and this one I'm a first AC. There's a bunch of different things that you can learn taking on different positions. So just because we have a filmmaking channel over here, we talk a lot about camera operating and cameras, doesn't mean that there isn't value to actually learning how to be a first assistant camera, learning some of those skill sets because it might be useful to you in your career. And for the most part, if you go with a traditional route, you kind of have to baby step your way up the ladder, and first AC is going to be one of those things you're going to need to do in order to move up. That being said, I'm pretty non-traditional, so that's just me talking at two sides of my mouth. That being said, a special shout out to Blackmagic for sending us the Pyxis to use on the shoot, Condor Blue for the accessories, Lucid Link for effectively saving this video's retention time, and as well as Axiom because I didn't want to shuttle over the set because it was super windy and we were outside. Now, one thing that I encourage is you see everybody else's videos because everyone else had a different role on set for this particular narrative shoot, and I'll leave those in my description down below or on the screen. We might have a playlist. I don't really know. We haven't figured it out yet. I decided to do this video like 3 weeks early, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.